The HOA notice arrived the same morning I planted lilacs for my late wife, neatly folded, smelling faintly of toner and rain. Name's Walt, 76, retired Army, been saluting that old flagpole longer than Trisha's been alive. The rope pulley squeaked as I raised it anyway. Ever had a rulebook thrown at your porch? What would you have done? Walt Branson rose early on Easter Sunday, ironed his old Army dress shirt, and stepped onto his porch, determined to raise a flag, not a fuss. It was the sort of spring morning where dew clung to the dogwood blossoms, and the hush of Sunday still lingered like a soft hymn. Walt's porch faced east, catching the first brush of sunlight over Maple Falls. The town still held on to its small-town charms, a diner on Main Street that never changed its menu, gas pumps that clicked off at $20 even, and neighbors who paused to wave from their mailboxes. Walt moved with the kind of quiet precision that came from years of habit. He'd set out the ceramic mug his wife once loved, cream-colored with a fading blue rose, and filled it with black coffee he measured with ritual. He listened to AM radio static hum beneath the sermon snippets and old jazz. Then, with his shirt crisp and medals aligned, he stepped outside and eyed the spot he'd marked 2 days earlier. With a well-worn drill in hand, he secured the white metal base to the patch of lawn just beside the porch steps. The pole, polished and plain, gleamed against the green. Walt unwrapped the folded flag, his original one from Vietnam, edges softened by time but colors still proud. The brass pulley chimed softly as he attached the cords, then, one slow motion at a time, began to raise it. Across the street, Louis Jensen squinted over his glasses from a wicker chair. He gave a slow nod, muttering, "Oh boy," more to himself than to anyone else. Mrs. Cartwright, a few doors down, lifted her watering can in greeting. This was Maple Falls, after all, where porch life mattered more than smartphones, and dignity had a seat at the table. But some things had changed. Trisha Glenn arrived as the flag reached halfway up. Her sneakers hit pavement in sharp cadence, her beige slacks uncreased despite the morning hour. She held a clipboard as tightly as a baton, eyes narrowing before she even stepped onto the lawn. "Mr. Branson," she began, as if correcting a schoolboy. "You know HOA regulations require prior notice for lawn installations." Walt tied off the rope without looking her way. "This isn't a flamingo or a plastic windmill," he said quietly. "It's a flag." She flipped a tab in her binder. "Pole height. Non-uniform fixtures. You need approval for permanent additions." He turned to her now. His face remained calm, but his gaze, behind those square glasses, was steady as stone. "I raised this in Vietnam. I'll raise it here." The breeze picked up. The flag unfurled fully, casting a long shadow on the lawn. Trisha didn't argue further. She scribbled something on a form, snapped the clipboard shut, and walked back to her silver SUV with mechanical purpose. Walt watched the car turn the corner before he leaned down and tightened the knot on the rope. Then, standing tall, he stepped back and saluted. As Walt salutes the flag alone, a teenage boy bikes past, pulls out his phone, and hits record. On Monday morning, a letter from the HOA arrived, typed, folded, and lined with polite threats. It slipped through the brass mail slot with an almost reverent hush and landed flat on the entryway rug. Walt spotted it as he returned from pouring a second cup of coffee, its envelope clean and too white against the worn floral carpet. He bent slowly to pick it up, already knowing what it would say. HOA matters didn't come with stamps, they came hand-delivered. He opened it at the dining table. The paper was thick, printed in a serif font that tried too hard to seem reasonable. At the top, notice of non-compliance. Below it, clauses and codes, each line a sharpened feather pretending to be harmless. He read the core message 3 times, a $150 fine for erecting an unapproved structure, with 3 days to remove the pole and flag. He folded it once and set it beside a ceramic sugar bowl, then reached for the rotary phone resting on a lace doily. But he didn't dial anyone. Instead, he stared at the long coil of the cord and listened to the quiet hum of the house. The knock came soft, followed by the familiar creak of the screen door hinges. Caleb's voice floated in before his face did. "Gramps? You up?" He stepped inside without waiting, a book bag slung across his shoulder, a folded newspaper under one arm, and a paper bag from the rusty mug in the other. "I brought lemon meringue pie. Thought you might want something sweet before reading bad news," Caleb said, placing the bag on the table. Then he noticed the letter. Walt slid it over without a word. Caleb read fast, lips pressing tighter with each line. When he finished, he pulled out his phone and took a picture. "Power shows up in polite fonts," he muttered. Walt raised an eyebrow. "I said that once," Caleb replied, "about the university's dress code notice. Thought I was being clever." He took a seat and opened his laptop, balancing it on his knees. Walt watched him pull up a browser, fingers dancing across the keyboard like it was second nature. "Let's see what we're dealing with. Maple Falls HOA bylaws PDF, got it." Walt pushed the pie closer to him. "You should eat first." Caleb grinned. "I'll eat while I fight." Across town, at the Rusty Mug Diner, the morning crowd settled into booths and counter stools. Nancy Harper was sipping tea at her usual spot near the window, knitting needles clicking beneath her reading glasses. Louis Jensen, seated across from her, was already telling the story before the waitress had filled his mug. "Flags up, letters down," he said. "They find Walt." Nancy blinked. "Find him? For a flag?" "3-day warning," Louis added. "HOA's using their fancy rules." Nancy reached into her handbag and pulled out a tiny notebook. "Time we use our fancy memory." By early afternoon, whispers moved faster than the town's delivery trucks. A quiet buzz stirred in the grocery store, the pharmacy, and the post office line. Nobody shouted, nobody rallied. But that evening, something subtle began to happen. Walt stepped out to check the mailbox again, though he knew it was empty. Across the street, he noticed a small flag, maybe 6 inches tall, pinned carefully into a flower pot on Louis's porch. A few houses down, another one leaned against a gnome in a garden bed. A third, tucked between 2 azalea bushes like it had always been there. Back inside, Caleb chuckled. "They cite flamingo claws, Gramps." "I'm serious, Section 9C, no lawn decor or statuary shall exceed 12 inches in height or deviate from the standard aesthetic of the neighborhood, including pink flamingos and similar items." He turned the screen so Walt could see. "They're lumping your flag in with novelty birds." Walt didn't laugh, but his eyes crinkled at the corners. Later that night, Caleb posted a photo online. It showed Walt in his pressed shirt, standing tall beside the flagpole, with sunlight catching the metal on his chest. The caption read simply, "All he did was raise a flag." By nightfall, someone anonymously leaves a bouquet and a tiny flag at Walt's porch step. By Wednesday morning, Walt's porch had been viewed 88,000 times, and rising. Caleb read the number aloud, eyebrows climbing as he scrolled. 88,000, Gramps. That's half the population of Dayton." Walt didn't respond. He was in his usual chair, a mug of black coffee steaming beside him, eyes fixed on the flag fluttering gently in the soft spring breeze. The morning sun edged along the porch railing, warming the old wood that Caleb had sanded and restained the summer before. Inside, the television remained off. The rotary phone hadn't rung once. But Caleb's laptop, balanced on a cushion beside him, buzzed with steady updates. "A veterans advocacy page just reposted the video," Caleb said, turning the screen so Walt could see. "They called you a quiet symbol of patriotism. Look, comments are pouring in, people thanking you for your service, asking for your address to send thank you cards." Walt shifted slightly but said nothing. He reached for the coffee, took a sip, and nodded once. A man used to standing at attention didn't need applause. Down on Main Street, the Rusty Mug Diner was busier than usual. Nancy Harper was at her regular spot, teacup in hand, eyes scanning the front page of the Maple Falls Gazette as Louis slid into the seat across from her. The diner special that day was meatloaf and mashed potatoes, with a slice of peach pie discounted for seniors. "Guess that flag waves faster than Trisha's printer," Nancy muttered, folding the paper and tapping the bold headline, "Maple Falls Veterans Stand Goes National." Louis chuckled. And here I thought the biggest news this week would be new paint at the fire station. Across town, in a small room with laminated wood paneling and mismatched chairs, Trisha Glenn called the HOA board to order. Her lips were tight, her blazer a little more pressed than usual. A pitcher of ice water sat ignored in the center of the table. 4 other board members were present, all less eager than her to speak first. "We're not here to debate the law," she began. "The structure violates uniformity. The bylaw is clear." Don Hendricks, a retired postmaster and one of the board's older members, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Trisha, the town paper ran a 2-page spread on Mr. Branson this morning. Maybe we ought to pause." "Pause?" she snapped. "If we backtrack now, we lose authority." "We're not losing authority," murmured Sarah Klein, the youngest member, "we're just losing control of the story." The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Trisha made a note in her binder but didn't reply. Back on Walt's porch, a stranger stood at the foot of the steps, Debbie Ivers, brown leather satchel slung over her shoulder and sunglasses tucked into her hair. "Mr. Branson," she called gently. Caleb emerged from inside, smiling. "You must be Debbie." "Cincinnati Tribune," she confirmed, pulling out a notebook. "I grew up here. Read about this in the alumni newsletter and drove up last night." Walt stood slowly, studying her. "I'm not here to sensationalize," Debbie added. "Just hoping to ask a few questions. Maybe get your side of things." Walt's jaw tightened. "There's not much to say." But Caleb, gently, placed a hand on his shoulder. "It might be good, Gramps. You speak, folks listen." For a long moment, Walt said nothing. Then, with a resigned nod, he stepped aside and opened the screen door. That evening, a quiet revolution bloomed. Nancy and Louis dragged 2 folding chairs onto the sidewalk across from Walt's house. Nancy planted a small flag between them. They sat without fanfare, greeting neighbors with casual waves. Soon, another pair of chairs appeared next door, and then more, aging porch furniture pulled from garages, paint-chipped rockers dusted off for the occasion. Flags, each one different in size and wear, lined the fences and steps. It wasn't protest. It was presence. Walt watched from his porch as night fell. Caleb refreshed the forum feed again and again, the likes ticking upward like a metronome. Somewhere deep in the shadows, Trisha's minivan crept down the road, headlights off, pausing just long enough to witness the town leaning quietly out of reach. When Walt brought in the mail just before bed, he paused at the final envelope. It was thicker than the others, cream-colored, with a crisp gold seal from the governor's office. Walt opens his mail, a thick envelope from the governor's office, stamped official. The town hall smelled of floor wax and old coffee, perfect for the quiet start of a storm. The Maple Falls Community Center hadn't seen this many people since the bake sale during the blizzard of '08. The air buzzed, not with outrage but something deeper, resolve. Folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of old coats and worn denim. Near the back, a crockpot simmered under a handwritten, chilly, mild sign, and a plate of lemon bars sat untouched beside the dusty podium. Overhead, one ceiling tile sagged, stained in a pattern that had long resembled the state of Ohio if you squinted just right. Caleb adjusted the handmade, community voice banner taped above the stage. Beside him, Nancy Harper clutched her notes, spine straight despite her age. A spark lit her eyes tonight, not mischief, but mission. Walt hovered near the door, arms crossed over a folder. He hadn't wanted to come. He'd said so twice, maybe 3 times. But Caleb had printed out 3 copies of the HOA charter, and Walt had quietly tucked one into his jacket pocket. People trickled in. Some in Sunday sweaters, others in work boots. Pastor Elijah nodded silently as he passed, taking a seat without a word. Louis Jensen waved Walt forward, but Walt shook his head and found a seat in the back corner. Nancy tapped the mic, which let out a low hum. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began. "No agenda tonight. Just voices. A few murmurs, a cough. You know why we're here. It started with a flag, but we all have stories, don't we? Heads nodded. Eyes drifted toward Walt. He remained still, folding and unfolding a page in his lap, over and over. Nancy continued. This isn't rebellion. This is accountability. She gestured toward Caleb, who stood, laptop in hand. So, Caleb said, just so we're clear, per Section 5, Paragraph 2 of the HOA Charter, residents have the right to call informal community meetings and record grievances without prior board approval. A ripple of quiet satisfaction passed through the crowd. Walt cleared his throat. People turned. I didn't ask for this, he said, rising slowly. Didn't want attention. But I've lived here 42 years. Raised 2 kids, buried 1 wife. I saluted the flag in Saigon and again 2 days ago. Not for fanfare. He paused. Folded the page again. We're neighbors. Not subjects. The silence that followed was full, like a room inhaling. Then a woman near the front stood. They fined me for my rosebushes, she said. Said they grew over the decorative fence line. A man beside her added, they told me my garage mural was distracting. It's my unit's crest from the Gulf War. Another voice, I got a notice for wind chimes. Laughter, tight but real, rippled across the room. And then, the side door opened. Tricia Glenn stepped inside, her beige slacks sharp as ever, binder clutched like a shield. Excuse me, she called, but as president of the HOA. You're welcome to listen, Nancy interrupted, her voice sweet but firm, but tonight isn't about titles. For a moment, Tricia stood frozen. Then she found a chair, back row, next to the crockpot, and sat. Nancy straightened. I propose we form a neighborhood group. Not a rebellion, not a coup. Just a voice. The Maple Residents Alliance. Independent. Observant. Watchful. Applause broke like spring thunder. An elderly man near the center aisle stood, removed his cap, and placed it on the floor beside him. He looked at Walt. I vote Walt honorary chairman. More applause. Louis hooped. Caleb smiled. Walt didn't answer at first. But his hands finally stilled. Later, the community center emptied slowly. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, casseroles packed up, hugs exchanged. Walt remained a little longer, helping stack chairs. Outside, in the dim parking lot, Tricia unlocked her car and slid into the driver's seat. She didn't start it right away. Instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed. He's not going to win. I'll have legal send him a notice tomorrow. Walt's mailbox creaked under the weight of another certified letter, but it wasn't the only thing waiting on his porch. There were 3 paper pinwheels planted in the flower box, red, white, and blue, cut from construction sheets and taped to skewers. A folded napkin sat beside them with lemon cookie crumbs and a note in looping kid handwriting, "We like your flag. Love, Molly and Jake, from House 22." Walt stood in the doorway longer than usual, letter in hand, watching the colors flutter. The flag overhead caught the same breeze, and something behind his ribs unclenched just a little. Inside, the house buzzed with the steady rhythm of Caleb's printer. Walt followed the sound to the kitchen where Caleb sat surrounded by documents. Morning, Caleb said, not looking up. We've got some fun bedtime reading. Municipal Code, State Homeowner Protection Statutes, Archived HOA bylaws, all highlighted. Walt set the envelope down next to a mug of coffee gone cold. Another fine. Caleb skimmed the letter, eyebrows arching. They're calling the porch chat an unauthorized gathering. That's a stretch. He grabbed his phone and dialed. Ms. Rand? It's Caleb Branson. We've got something new. Ms. Rand arrived by noon, briefcase in hand, black hair tied in a tidy twist. She wore hiking boots and carried a reusable grocery bag filled with printed legal code. Walt opened the door and she greeted him with a warm smile and a firm handshake. Let's talk about paper shields, she said, unpacking forms onto the dining table. She explained how the HOA had overstepped, citing statutes with the kind of clarity that made Caleb whistle low. "They're operating like a private kingdom," she said. "Problem is, the state of Ohio doesn't recognize royalty, just law." Caleb nodded. "And if we push now, we might push something open." By mid-afternoon, Walt was outside, tending to the azaleas with slow, deliberate care. His knees creaked with each crouch, but he didn't mind. Around him, the porch had grown livelier, not noisy, just full. Folding chairs leaned against railings, left by neighbors. Small jars of lemonade showed up unasked for. One porch post bore a child's crayon drawing of a flag, sky, and Walt, big ears, big grin, tiny glasses. The doorbell chimed. It was Miriam Porter, retired judge. She wore a crocheted shawl and held a clipboard. "Thought I might help oversee the new alliance. Just so things stay above board." Walt offered her the seat closest to the porch column. "Plenty of room," he said, "and plenty to watch." As the sun dipped, people began arriving, Nancy with extra cups, Louie with a plastic container of pickles, someone from Elm Street carrying a lawn chair and a thermos of cider. No one made speeches. They just sat. Talked. Laughed once in a while. Across the street, Tricia peeked through her blinds. When Walt caught her gaze, he nodded once. She didn't nod back. Inside, Ms. Rand drafted paperwork while Caleb typed. "We're filing an injunction," she said. "On behalf of several homeowners, including you." "I didn't ask to lead anything," Walt muttered, running a hand along the wood grain of his porch rail. "You didn't," Ms. Rand replied. "But you stood up. Sometimes that's enough." A sticky note clung to the refrigerator door, Caleb's handwriting scrawled across it in pen, "Paper fights paper. Let's win by the rules." By morning, the porch was quieter but not empty. Walt stepped out with his coffee, sat down next to the drawing taped to the post. As he looked down Main Street, he spotted something new, an unfamiliar van with a satellite dish and a camera logo on the side. News trucks rolled down Main Street. Walt's flagpole now features on state headlines, "Veteran vs. HOA, where's the line?" The sky turned gray the morning Tricia announced an emergency HOA vote, though no one had seen the agenda. A thin mist hung low over Maple Falls, soaking into hedges and brick steps. Damp footprints marked the threshold of the local church hall, where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, blinking just enough to keep folks on edge. The carpet gave off that familiar wet dog smell after rain, and umbrellas lined the entry like soldiers standing guard. Walt sat in the back corner, his coat damp, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Caleb stood nearby, coat slung over a chair, eyes scanning the room. Across the aisle, Nancy distributed paper ballots, her purse thudding softly as she leaned over to help Louie with his bifocals. Tricia Glenn stood at the front like a general without an army. Her beige pantsuit was immaculate, but her tone cracked under pressure. "This is an emergency session," she began, raising her voice over the shuffle of chairs. "Per Section 4.6 of our bylaws, the HOA president may initiate an emergency powers clause when the community is at risk of disorder." "Risk caused by what?" Miriam Porter's voice cut clean through the air. She stepped forward, clipboard in hand, calm and unbothered by Tricia's urgency. "You've bypassed the required 48-hour notice. No meeting minutes posted. No public agenda." Tricia stiffened. "This community is facing division. Disrespect of order. It demands action. Control only works when folks let it," Nancy muttered, just loud enough. Caleb moved through the rows, gently helping Mrs. Ruggins with her reading glasses, pointing out the yes/no boxes. The ballots were printed simply, "Motion to suspend HOA president pending charter review." No names. Just choice. Pastor Elijah stood silently near the front, one hand resting on the back of a folding chair, the other holding a small, dog-eared Bible. When Tricia raised her voice again, he cleared his throat deep and low. "Let us proceed with calm. Anger only muddies what's already murky." Tricia's jaw clenched. She tried once more. This meeting was meant to restore order. But her voice bounced hollowly against the stained acoustic tiles. Walt rose slowly, his knees protesting. He didn't speak or look at anyone. He made his way to the old coffee urn and refilled it, steady and measured. The gurgle of dark liquid into a pot was the only sound in the room for a moment. It grounded them. Ballots passed forward in silence. No counting aloud, just the soft rustle of paper and the click of a pen now and then. Miriam organized the stack on the table. Tricia stood with arms crossed, nostrils flaring. The count was not close. Miriam's voice was even. Motion carries. Suspension enacted pending full charter review. Tricia slapped her clipboard down, papers flaring in a small white cloud. This isn't over, she snapped. You people think you've won? No one answered. The door banged behind her as she left, rain gusting in for half a second before it clicked shut. Pastor Elijah bent to pick up a few scattered ballot pages, his hands weathered and slow. He turned to Walt, who had just settled back into his chair, coffee now steaming. They'll be looking to you now. The next morning, Walt found a folded note on his porch, "Don't lower the flag." He bent to pick it up, the handwriting unfamiliar but the intent clear. The paper had curled edges from the dew, and the ink had slightly blurred in one corner. He held it for a long moment before slipping it into his shirt pocket, just over his heart. The lilacs along the side fence had begun to bloom again, soft purple bursts nestled in green. His wife used to cut a sprig for the kitchen vase every spring. He hadn't touched the bush since she passed, but this year, they'd bloomed fuller than he remembered. A cardinal darted from branch to branch as he adjusted the flag's ropes. The stars and stripes flared briefly in a gust before settling again. Across the street, Louis gave a slow thumbs up from behind his screen door. Later that day, Walt found himself in front of the rusty mug diner again, this time with a small mic clipped to his collar. A local news van had arrived earlier, its reporter polite but persistent. "We just want a word," she'd said. "You've become something of a local legend." Walt had frowned at that. "I'm no legend. I just stood on my porch." Still, he agreed to a few words. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting a warm light across Main Street. The reporter asked about the flag, the controversy, the vote. He kept his answers brief. "This flag's been through worse than paper threats," he said at the end. That quote made the evening broadcast. Inside the diner, Caleb sat nursing a black coffee and scrolling through a scanned PDF of the city's public code library. His eyes widened as he read, then he leaned back with a quiet whistle. "Grandpa," he said later, spreading the document out on the kitchen table, "they've been bluffing for years. Any HOA fine over $100 is invalid unless it goes through municipal court. State statute from 2003. Walt didn't smile, but his eyes twitched at the corners. Miriam came by around supper time with fresh news. She was drafting a petition for retroactive relief, asking the city to invalidate every improper fine and issue formal apologies. "We're not just fixing this," she said, "we're building a precedent." The townsfolk, energized but cautious, watched the old HOA shift into limbo. A temporary committee was formed, filled with both reformers and a few lingering loyalists. They planned to meet in a backyard the next evening, out of habit more than strategy. Walt attended. He arrived with no speech, no folders, no fanfare, just a folding chair under one arm. Conversation sputtered as he took a seat in the ring of plastic chairs. He listened. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. You can't govern neighbors without knowing their names. No one argued. By dusk, the group had scattered, their energy softened into something less adversarial. Miriam nodded across the yard as she passed him. Caleb lingered by the fence, chatting with a young couple who'd only moved in last fall. Walt walked home slow. The lilacs caught the breeze again. He climbed the porch steps and paused, surprised. There, next to his pole, stood another flag. Smaller, but just as proud. No note. No signature. Only cloth and intention. The day the flagpole was formally protected by city ordinance, a final letter arrived, from Tricia. It was postmarked the day before, bearing a Florida return address. Walt turned it in his hands for a moment before opening it with his pocketknife. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting firm but unfamiliar. Someone else had likely addressed it. "Dear Mr. Branson," it began, "though we've stood on opposite sides, I hope you'll accept this as a gesture of closure. I'm leaving Maple Falls for a fresh start. Florida seems fitting. Some rules are meant to be enforced, but perhaps others, in time, are meant to be rewritten. Respectfully, Tricia Glenn." Walt folded the letter and set it on the kitchen table. He didn't smile, didn't scoff. He just nodded once. By late afternoon, the square filled with lawn chairs, folding tables, and the scent of potluck casseroles and grilled sausages. Kids darted between picnic blankets with juice boxes in hand, and a small Bluetooth speaker nestled in a cooler lid played oldies from a scratchy playlist. Someone brought lemonade in a mason jar. Someone else brought cobbler. Walt stood a little to the side. He wore his old army shirt again, the buttons polished, sleeves neatly ironed. Caleb hovered nearby, fielding questions from local press and greeting neighbors. Miriam leaned against a tree, arms crossed in satisfaction, while Pastor Elijah offered quiet blessings to whoever passed his way. A small podium had been set up next to the flagpole. The new plaque gleamed in the spring sun. "In quiet resistance, dignity prevails, Freedom of Display on Personal Property Act, 2025. When Walt finally took the podium, it was only for a minute. "I didn't want to fight," he said. "I just wanted to raise a memory. But I'm grateful for what it became." The crowd applauded gently, not out of celebration but recognition. After the ceremony, Nancy handed him an envelope of returned fines, every cent the HOA had wrongly taken, now refunded with interest. Walt glanced inside, then closed it without counting. "For the scholarship fund," he said simply, nodding toward the elementary school across the park. That evening, long after the folding chairs were packed away and the casseroles emptied, Walt made his way to the small schoolroom at the edge of Maple Falls. Inside, a poster read, "How One Flag Changed a Neighborhood." Crayon drawings lined the wall, flags, porches, old men with kind eyes. He left a single folded flag on the teacher's desk. "In case you ever want to show them up close," he whispered. Back at home, he tended to the small bed of lilacs planted under the flagpole, their blooms full and bright beneath the plaque. The air smelled faintly of lilac and warm earth. Crickets began to chirp. Somewhere down the block, a harmonica played a slow, wandering tune. At sunset, Walt stepped outside with a cup of tea in hand. He lowered the flag slowly, folded it corner by corner, and placed it on the new wooden stand he had built that morning. The brass plate glinted under the porch light. Across the street, a little girl with pigtails and grass-stained socks walked by with her mother. She paused, looked at the plaque, then straightened and gave a shy salute. Walt, still behind the screen door, watched in silence. He lifted his cup of tea in a gentle toast. The porch light flicked on. The flag, even folded, stood taller than ever. The lilacs bloomed quietly under the flagpole, long after the papers had been filed and the cameras gone. What began as one man's quiet stand became a porchlight beacon for a whole town rediscovering its voice. In a world where rules too often serve the few, it turns out that dignity, patience, and neighbors who care still carry weight. When power forgets compassion, it's the porch swings and garden chairs that remind us what real community means. Like a flag in steady wind, one stand, rooted in memory, lifted by many, can change the shape of home.